Should I be hearing you?
Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is December 22, 2024. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Please subscribe. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Larry Gottheim. Where are you calling in from, Larry?
I'm in my little studio apartment in Yonkers, New York, just outside the Bronx.
The Bronx. How cool is that? Well, it's really an honor and a pleasure. We did an interview 11 years ago, and it was really enlightening for me. And we talked about thinking and thought. You brought up Heidegger saying that thought is in your hand or something like that. It was amazing what I learned from you thinking, in your regards to Heidegger. But the first question I have for you today is, can humans think without language?
I think so because I'm interested more. I've developed that interest over all of this time, but I'm thinking about animals, for example. So it's questionable what goes on in animals when they make these sounds and make these behavior things that looks like they're thinking. Do they have a language? They certainly don't think in English. So do they, I'm working on stuff with elephants and whales that do communicate with each other so that there's some kind of language thing, but it's definitely not English. And I don't know if it's words or what it's like.
Very good. Chomsky says language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language breaks down? When language doesn't work, what do you do?
Well, just to go previously, what you said is I've been thinking a lot about how we are formed. Basically, I feel that something has gone wrong in the world and with human life. And it starts, obviously, even before birth, but learning language as is a big preoccupation of the early years where we come to learn language. That's a part of a kind of indoctrination. That's part of where whatever goes wrong is already going wrong back there. And the learning of language is part of our indoctrination to be the kind of humans that we have become.
Right. There's a lot packed into what you just said. So if you're talking to a clerk at the store and there's communication breakdown, what do you do usually?
Well, communication breakdown can mean different things. I mean, it could be, say, that you're saying to the clerk, I want a pound of coffee or whatever, and they don't understand what you're saying, and so you have to correct them. But the kind of breakdown of language that I'm thinking of is much more fundamental because simple sentences like I want a pound of coffee are easily corrected within our language system, but the breakdown of language on a deeper level may not be able to be broken or fixed at all. But we do have things like gesture. I mean, when we're in a country where most people don't speak English, we can still manage to make our way around by gesturing and facial expressions and so on.
Yeah, a lot of packed in there. I really appreciate, Larry, how we are formed if something goes wrong. So that's interesting. Like, did humans invent that things go wrong because they invented the word wrong? Because maybe humans didn't consider that something's good or bad, broken or fixed. They just proceeded on. And then when we invented language, we had to stick these words onto it because, it's almost like how people complain and gossip. Someone said, if you complain and you gossip, you live longer. So that gets I'm glad you're laughing because we're here to have fun. It's like getting it out of your system. So did you, I'm curious of the etymology on the word wrong, you know, how things go wrong. Did humans invent things going wrong, or is it innate in us to, live in wrongness?
Well, that's interesting because the way that we are indoctrinated by language and that something has gone wrong, I don't think that there's a kind of mastermind that is behind it, that's using language consciously as a way of molding us. For example, one of the things about human life is it's so economic, like we are developed into creatures that are consumers, especially around this time of year before Christmas. It's clear that we have been molded somehow, but how does that happen? That is kind of a little bit beyond me to know, but I feel that consumerism is just one element of what has gone wrong.
Oh, I would agree with you 100%. That's like create the disease and offer the cure. Like your hands are chapped, you need hand lotion.
Right.
So, and all these things that we invent to say, well, do we really need them? That's sort of the trick of language, that we're so, there's two things you also evoked for me in what you just said. This is really important that you brought these up. Is Duchamp said there's no solutions because there's no problems. In regards to this, things going wrong, how would you process that Duchamp quote?
Well, it's very close to what I'm thinking about in this film that I'm working on. Um, maybe say the quote again because it's.
Yeah. Duchamp said there's no solutions because there's no problems.
That's very interesting. Whether the problems are the problems are not universally true. The problems are sort of given to us, so that it's already set up by the problem. So you could say that there are no problems, like trees don't have problems, stars don't have problems.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Trees don't have problems. That is good. Yeah, and there's a little tree and a little stardust in everybody. But you brought up that word fundamental, and I know you started as a musician early in your career. You have an interest in music, especially because your films were silent early on, and then they did have sound. There's one question, if we do get into music, I just wanted to push it into this moment. What's more fundamental, music or language?
Music.
Yeah. So Larry, this is really good. I appreciate your time. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Well, again, I've grown interested in other things and have some problems in my the influence of Heidegger because of his connection with the Nazis and so on is sort of a disturbing thing. But say the question again.
Are you observing humans in general? And it's a stupid question. I know it's both and it depends, but are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings? Are we more head or more heart?
Okay. Well, of course, this goes back to the idea of what the Heidegger thing of what is thinking, so that um, we are we are sort of thinking beings, but we may not be thinking in the true essential thing of what thinking is. Um, it's a very good question about heart. I felt for something about me that I was sort of, well, the musical training was connected to the heart, but also there is the intellectual thing. But I felt around the time that I started making films that I was too intellectual, and that I tried to sort of get away from my intellectual response to being in the world, uh, and have more of a heart um, person. Uh,
Yeah, but back to your filmmaking. What's the name of your film that's the tree in the landscape for like 10 minutes?
well, fog line is
Oh,
probably
Fog Line. Okay, so Fog Line, you're saying you were more intellectual when you made that, or you were being more heart when you made that?
well. I was okay. I got to separate anti-intellectual from heart. I
Yeah.
think I think that when I got into trying out films where I would set up the camera, set up a situation, and then let the camera roll, that was against doing something where you were like in a Hollywood film where they have the whole screenplay already written before they start filming. I didn't want to have my intellect. I didn't feel that my gift,
Yeah.
although I think a lot and am an intellectual in a certain way, I don't feel that my gift is being an intellectual. I feel that where I break through the intellectual thing into some other dimension where my films may have something to contribute besides the pleasure that they offer.
Beautiful, well put. Because back to music, Thelonious Monk said all music is or musicians are mathematicians. Yeah, but right. I mean, we don't, people can create music without black ants on white paper and notes, but in general, there's some sort of script, like you were saying with Hollywood films, people write out scores. And the other thing you said that's amazing about that is reminding me of Bridget Bardot says, "When I make love, I don't think." And I'm like, good luck. How do you turn your brain off? Or people who meditate, they go, okay, think about not thinking. And there's a bumper sticker on a car in my street and it says, "Don't believe everything you think." And I say, hey, don't
Well,
believe everything you feel. It
right,
could apply that way too.
it's true.
So these are two questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
Very interesting. Um, I want to say that music, um, animal sounds have a kind of structure to them, and music does. So that, for example, Charlie Parker's music had most of the uh, time of a piece is taken by improvisation. So I'm interested in that. Like, what happens when a jazz musician is improvising, um, um, and they don't know a second before? It's just like when we speak, we don't a second before we're speaking, we don't know what we're going to say. So that jazz music and all kinds of music, besides ones that are written intellectually, they also have a kind of structure. That's why I feel that the idea of structure is way more deep and universal than what's usually called structural film. I mean, like you don't call Charlie Parker structural music. I mean,
That's good. Larry, that's Thelonious Monk. My friend has this theory. He says Monk heard all the same notes Charlie Parker heard, but only decided to play some of them. So, that's being selective. Like, that I've interviewed so many musicians and they go like, don't think. And I'm like, yeah, right. How do you not think when you're improvising? Because you got this Rolodex of licks in your head and you're referencing them.
Right. There also is things in music, like, for example, the key. I mean, now a lot of music that I love in jazz is free music, which is not key oriented, or I'm very interested in Schoenberg and Weber and so on, different kind of structure. But jazz, often the score of a jazz piece is some kind of thing, of certain kind of notes that indicate what the key is and what the mode is and so on, so that there is a kind of structure that's given. That's why they're able to improvise and they don't lose track of each other, because they understand what structural form is suggested by the piece that they're playing.
It sounds like you're trying to explain harmonics by Ornette Coleman, who even his band members would go, I don't know what it means, but you can Google it and run. But you're talking all my heroes: Ornette Coleman, Cecil Taylor, Albert Eiler, and Sun Ra. And Sun Ra was approached by someone backstage once, and he said, dude, my kid could do that, bang on the piano like that. And Sun Ra went, but can he transcribe it?
This is really interesting. When we talked 11 years ago, I had no idea how many things we have in common. I mean, now you're really going right into the zone of stuff that I am really thinking about and working with.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a pleasure, Larry. And your films are amazing. And it's like you've really followed the path of so many who music, painting, art, literature is sort of the dominant. It all goes back to comparative literature you studied in books, and then experimental film. All these young kids, they go to Harvard and they study semiotics, and then they go, I can't do this with language. I can do it with experimental film, though.
Right. I'm also interested in ritual music.
Oh yeah.
Speaking of trees, I have a film in the middle of my work called Tree of Knowledge, which actually has to do with some of the stuff that we're talking about. And in the current project that I'm working on, I'm going to have quotations back to Tree of Knowledge, because some of the issues that are sort of hinted at, even to myself, in Tree of Knowledge are sort of picked up now, many years later, in what I'm working on now.
Yeah, so important. And so the second Turing question, and we'll come full circle and come back to that. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
Well, that's a big issue. I've started to be, I don't want to get into it. It seems both very important and also boring. It's not like I went through a period of being very influenced by quantum mechanics. So now I've kind of discovered AI as something that is a little bit interesting, but that's the big issue, is that it's artificial intelligence, and it's always recognized as something that is yet being different from human thought. And
well, it's interesting. AI, it's like how we take language and letters and words, and they evoke more than their meaning. So AI could be auditory imagination. That's T.S. Eliot. Or you can flip it into IA. That's McLuhan, integral awareness.
Did you just come up with that thing for AI?
No, I've been studying it for years.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, this is amazing. I think it's endless. IA Richards is the the guy who turned McLuhan on to Finnegan's Wake at New Criticism at Cambridge. So it's endless. You can take these, it's all words evoke more than their meaning, but we like sort of go along with what Lily Tomlin said. Reality is just a collective hunch. So we kind of feel that words, we can agree upon what they mean. But, you know, it's back to T.S. Eliot saying, poetry can communicate before it's understood. So, you know, you look at your tree you look at the tree in fog line for, what is it, 10 minutes or 8 minutes?
11 minutes.
11 minutes. You look at that for 11 minutes and it's like, you know, what's his name? The guy who made, I forgot his name. Anyways, he's a LA filmmaker. He made a structural film of a clock turning for 11 or a same amount, like about 10 minutes. And it's just a, you know who it is?
Morgan Fisher, I think.
Morgan Fisher. His clock is turning for 11 minutes. Now, just explain that to any sane person and go, would you watch a clock on a movie turning for that many minutes? And they'll go, that's stupid. And then one guy said it all to me. He says, I've done that. I've sat in a room in school and stared at the clock. So it really hit home to someone like your film. Someone could stare at a tree for 11 minutes and watch the mist and the fog change. That's a beautiful thing, but it's not what the norm has defined what movie making is. So that's the beauty, is how do you expand on these mediums like you have? So here's the next one, Larry. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
More pursue, are you saying?
Yeah.
I don't know how to pursue happiness. I mean, happiness seems to somehow fall on me all of a sudden. Like when I'm happy, when I think, when am I happy? It's usually something that I haven't been searching to try to be happy. I mean, I'm just doing whatever I think I'm doing, and then all of a sudden I'm happy. But then the opposite happens also. All of a sudden, or more slowly, I think you get miserable over more time. Then you get happy. Happy is like a fast.
Yeah. Well, that's important because, see, Larry, I'm for anecdotes, stories, tangents, and especially for, it's me and you versus the wording on the question. So you analyze, like, are you more pursuing happiness or meaning? People, like, they think it's the questions about that, but then you said, well, what about that word you use, Gerry, pursue? So I'm for us, you giving me feedback and talking about the wording on the questions, you know, with the noun and the verb. I'm really for that because I got it from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And he says that happiness doesn't tend to last, meaning tends to last. What do you think of that?
Well, alas, it's true that happiness doesn't last.
Yeah.
And meaning, when we think we have meaning, we think of it as being eternal.
Yeah.
Never change, although it does change.
Yes, it does change. Exactly. Very good. So does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
Deep question. What I think also is I don't believe in the soul as it's usually thought about, but there is something like that. I mean, so that I feel that the brain is only part of our reception of thought that has something to do with the thing that you asked about way at the beginning that I haven't thought about so much recently. That thought is in the hand. I mean, Heidegger uses the example of like a
Yeah.
carpenter, but the way that the thought could be something that's involved in the hand and the whole body means that it's not just the brain. The idea of the brain as the dictator is part of what's wrong with dictators that are unfortunately taking over so much of the world, or have always been taking over so much of the thing, is to have this part of your body that's the king of the body is the brain. And like when we talk about the heart, also, we're not necessarily talking about the literal organ that's pumping the blood. It's the feeling that we have inside of us that we call our heart, meaning the feeling of love or whatever, which is not just a matter of pumping the blood.
Yeah, that's metaphoric. And, this is a big question that's just come up. McLuhan says all words are metaphoric. And so then, when I ask a question like that, does the brain more detect or create consciousness? Do you mean literally or metaphorically? Where I ask these questions and people aren't sure which way I mean. Well, if all words are metaphoric, then what is literal a metaphor?
That's interesting that there is the unknown.
Yeah.
So that we sense, well, let's say in poetry or even speaking, say something to somebody and you feel that you've really said something. Where is that coming from?
Yeah. Again, it's like a Rolodex in our head. We got all these licks and we know how to put words together and sound like we know what we're talking about. Like they ask, you like Andy Warhol, I love it. They ask Andy Warhol, like, why did you do this painting? And he goes, can I just go blah, 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 blah? And they go, yeah. So he goes, blah, 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 blah. It says, dude, you're talking Finneganese. That's what what Joyce invented. So what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
That's a good question. And there's a lot of mysteries in the quantum world about how did it come about. Like in Einstein's E equals mc squared, where c is the speed of light. But it didn't come about, he didn't arrive at that by thinking about light. He arrived at that by thinking about mathematics. So that the speed of the idea of the speed of light is already a kind of metaphor where it has a lot of mysterious things. For example, time. I mean, speed involves time. One of the things that interested me in my past couple of films and in quantum mechanics is this idea of quantum entanglement, where there's a connection between two particles in which if you something about one particle affects what happens to the other particle in no time at all. It doesn't take any time. It's simultaneously there, which is a really big paradox, which I like paradoxes.
Well, that's called simultaneity, all at onceness. This is both Frank Zappa and James Joyce said, all times are happening now. And we're going to get into this. What you just brought up is Dante, all this stuff, and that you're the roots of. But I mean, let's go to poetry for a second, because well, no, I wanted to interject this one line that I learned from Frank Zappa. He didn't make it up, but it's called a wavicle. So it's a combination of the particle and the wave. as one, the wavicle. And that's sort of what I think you were saying. Is that quantum entanglement? Is that similar to wavicle, you think?
Well, of course, that goes back to the idea of light being both a wave and a particle. So
Yeah.
wavicle is a great term. I never heard of that before. But
Yeah.
even how something could be, I mean, there's a lot of paradoxes that I like to immerse myself in this world of, because how could something be two different things at the same time?
Yeah.
I mean, we come to learn it, like you learn in high school, whatever, that light is both a wave and a particle. And if you think, how can that be? You don't know how it can be, but yet it is,
Yeah.
whether you think it or not.
It's Larry. It's because we can invent words to kind of try to describe that. So, when I first read Zappa said wavicle, I says, wait a minute, did he make that up? And then I looked it up and some other guy made it up years before. But it sounds like quantum entanglement. But I'm going to ask my physics guy. He knows it because he knows what effects precede causes is. And that's one of the heaviest things I've ever learned from McLuhan's breaking the Finnegan's Wake code is effects precede causes. And that's actually what Edgar Allan Poe invented by inventing the detective novel. That's called reasoning backwards. So that when you write a detective novel, you only give the reader so much information, and then they get swooped into the whole experience because they go, I know what's going to happen next. And so this is the effect precedes the cause. Like we're experiencing right now what's called television telephone. This started in 1939 at the New York World's Fair. So we've been doing Zoom since 1939, but that's because Finnegan's Wake came out the same year. But it really didn't hit us till 2001, Kubrick's film, because we saw the guy from the spaceship call his daughter and wish her a happy birthday on Zoom. But it wasn't called that. It was called television telephone. So, the amazing thing is everybody lives in Zoom world now. And Aretha Franklin said it best, who's Zooming who? But, this is poetry. Audre Lorde, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Her colleague Yvonne Rainer said, oh, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
I do think that the camera, that cinema, the tools of cinema can be instruments to probe the nature of reality in a kind of deeper way. Something that I talk about a lot has to do with the film Vertigo, where the greatest part of that film is when James Mason, not James Mason,
whoever it is, not Gregory Peck, no, Jimmy Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart, when he's confronted with what seems to be the new woman that's the same as the old woman, and as in the audience we feel a sense of mystery that is the real mystery. Then at the end of the film, where it gets unraveled in some kind of stupid way, that doesn't really solve the problem of the fact that in the middle of the film, she is both the same woman and a different woman at the same time. Yeah. And that's really a very deep thing. And sometimes in Hitchcock, he gets into something that's really very deep, but then he's forced by the nature of story in the movies to explain everything, in a way it doesn't really explain it. It drains it of its real mystery.
It drains. That's great. Yeah. Hitchcock was draining because then the there's effects precede causes perfect, Larry, because the essence of the greatest film ever made, Sans Soleil by Chris Marker, is all about vertigo, and it's all about T.S. Eliot. And it's like Jay Rosenblatt told me, well, how were you affected by Sans Soleil? And he goes, how I imagined Marker made it. Not, I've studied all his interviews and all the books about the film, and here's how he made it. He said, how I imagined it. So everybody and their mother can study Hitchcock till the cows come home, and we'll say, well, this is how he did this. I mean, how you broke down what Hitchcock did was amazing, because that's Peter Greenaway saying cinema's much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. Mm-hmm. That's what Hitchcock's just a storyteller, and he, all the Larry, cinema's only 130 years old. What's it been hijacked by? Narrative storytelling. Greenaway, it's all we're doing is filming plays, not all, the majority of cinema. So you saying the cinema camera to probe the nature of reality is amazing answer to the new tool. Thank you. That was really enlightening. And I did leave out one thing. See, James Joyce invented Zoom and disguised it as a book, or he invented AI and disguised it as a book. That's where, it all falls back, like Borges says, back to literature. No, Mallarmé says it all goes back to a book, and then what is you're making films all these years, and then when did you put out The Red Thread? What year did that book come out?
It still needs to get out there, really, because it's needs to get out into the world. But it was probably 3 years ago that I finished it.
So that's 2021?
Yeah, something like that, right.
Okay, so I have to, before I forget, because we're going to get into the senses eyes, the cover, now you wrote that book. The cover of that book has a picture of you in a winter setting. And I couldn't quite tell, are your eyes open or are their eyes shut?
Well, now I'm going to reveal a secret to you, is that's not me. That is a still from my film Tree of Knowledge. And inside the film Tree of Knowledge, there's footage from a earlier, like 1950s, 40s educational film for children about the seasons.
Oh, and that's beautiful.
There were two children, Kenneth and Louise. This is Kenneth, one of the two children, who in that scene where he's saying that the sun is in a certain position, and he's saying, do you know why? And he looks up at the sky. And to me, that is not me, but it's a metaphor of me. It's a persona who represents me. And he is somebody who is quizzical. He's opened his mind to wonder. It's like in this film, the Seasons film, that's trying to show him the surety of what causes the seasons. Beneath that, there's a mystery that what that still represents is he just becomes aware. He doesn't know what it is, but he becomes aware that, wait a minute, there's something way more deep than what you're telling me in this film for children.
Amazing. But in essence, do you guess that his eyes are open or shut, or do you know for certain his eyes are open or shut? And the still on the front of the book.
I'm not sure, but in my imagination, I want his eyes to be open.
Yes, that's good. In my imagination. That's the beauty of imagination. We can imagine anything.
Some whole bunch of stuff that came into my mind that I just don't want to let it go by, but it goes back very earlier in our conversation. But it's in the beginning was the word.
Yeah.
What the hell does that mean?
Well, in the beginning was the word means that we invented words, and before we invented words, there was something before that. I think. I mean, it's no, I'm not answering the question. Dude, I go to John Cage. Larry, that's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer.
Well, in Genesis, there's a world that exists. In other words, when they eat from the tree of knowledge, that's not the first thing that happens in the world. They were created before that, and they had kind of life and whatever. And then somewhere along in that life, then they ate the tree of knowledge. So knowledge came later.
Yeah. But that's, again, they might have had knowledge before that, but they didn't have a word for it. Just because you don't have a word for something doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
And you know what kind of knowledge they had is sex. The first thing that they did after they ate the tree of knowledge is they then looked at each other, and for the first time now, they had sexual attraction to each other. So they covered their nakedness because it never came up before that. You know, they were naked just like animals are naked.
Yeah. That's back to Bridget Bardot. When I make love, I don't think. They were thinking, and then they're like, oh no, I gotta think. They just let it happen naturally. That's called a living organism. That's the flow of the river, the flow. You know, just things happen. Don't get too caught up in them. But again, if you get caught up in them, you might increase the flow. Like the musicians who say, don't think, go with the flow. I'm like, yeah, right. So Larry, this is great. What new toy do you suggest?
I don't know, a kaleidoscope.
Oh, that's good. A kaleidoscope. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Whether I'll be able to fall asleep easily. I hate that. You know, I try to turn it off. You know, you often there's a problem. You know, during the day you encounter some deep problem, deep sorrow, deep whatever that's churning around in your mind, and so I need sometimes some kind of artificial thing to help me get past that so I can go to sleep. And then sometimes the greatest thing is when you wake up the next morning and you feel free of it. The problem disappeared. You see the solution. What's terrible is you wake up and, oh no, this thing starts grinding around in your head. You haven't gotten rid of it yet.
Yeah. Well described. So I wanted to add one thing that we skipped over because we're going I go too fast with you. I wish I could keep a slower pace. Listening to the one I did 11 years ago, man, the great moments is that there's 2 tape recorders on that table and one of them is turning. And when I ask you a question, there's these gaps of silence that are so intense because you hear it going, you know, and then at the end, I think one of the tape recorders got bumped off and there's no buzz of the cassette machine anymore. But those gaps when you're thinking are so important for me because people think when I ask a question, they have to answer it right off the bat. And I'm like, no, you don't. Silence is totally okay. But most people don't read my suggestions before the interviews and they don't even follow that. They think, well, if you say something, then I've got to say something immediately. And I was like, no, you don't. You can sit there and think and wait. There's no rush. So the one thing I forgot was when you said the tool would be the cinema camera to probe the nature of reality. That reminds me of something I heard Jean Rouch say, the French documentarian. He says, when I put a camera between me and you, it's more real than when there's no camera. Now, most people go, that's bullshit. I goes, no, that's an amazing phenomenon because that's all people do now. They live by filming themselves or shooting themselves every fucking second. And that's why, excuse me, but that's why they we want to live life without this tool in between us. But words are a tool, gestures are a tool, a camera's a tool, a cell phone's a tool. It's just, how is that tool shaping your behavior, and what can you do about it is the more important thing to probe. But I think this, to probe the nature of reality, is amazing. Here's the next one, Larry. McLuhan learned from a poet that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Larry, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
That's really interesting. Of course, we can never see as much as the camera sees. In other words, when the camera is open, so much stuff is in front of the camera, coming, rushing into the camera instantaneously. And so we can sort of interpret it. That's what we do when we edit this stuff. I mean, like, it's interesting thinking about this, is that editing is taking footage that's full of whatever is in there and selecting certain things about it that makes us put this next to that.
Yeah.
Or select this part of a shot from that.
But why do we ignore that? But let me interject. That's the funny thing. When McLuhan had this test and they showed people in another country, like whatever you want to call them, correct, natives or that didn't grow up watching movies, and they showed them a movie, and then they go, "What'd you think?" And the protagonist is in the middle of the screen doing something, and a chicken ran in the background through the back, and the African people went, "Where'd that chicken go?" They weren't trained to pay attention to the protagonist. They were seeing something else the camera saw that was, not an important part of the storytelling, phenomenon of the movie. So, I mean, why, we look to our artists. You've looked to literature and to music and to film, and these artists have done more. There's something deeper they tell us. They might not even know it, but generally humans ignore what the deeper message is in art. Why do they ignore it?
Well, one way is that they're just have been trained to ignore it.
Yeah.
Because it changes also, even for the maker or the photographer, whatever.
Yeah.
Even the people with their cell phone, I don't know what they're going to do. Nobody has enough time to even look at a tiny bit of what they've made on their cell phones. But if, let's say, 20 years later, you look at something, you see something there that was always there, but you never noticed it. Like, let's say, what the people were wearing, or what's in the background, or whatever. I mean, there's always stuff that's ignored, and we change as the viewer, even for films, with our own films, which we see hundreds of thousands of times. It's not always the same thing, and over a long stretch of time, you see it differently. You see something in it that you never saw before, and then you think, your question, how come I didn't see it before?
Yeah. It's amazing because McLuhan updated his most famous aphorism, "The medium is the messenger, medium is massage," mid-career, to "the user is the content." So when we're seeing your film, when I saw your film 11 years ago, I see it now. I'm going to see something not completely different, but I'm going to experience it different. So do artists have moral obligation?
Well, I think it could be. I mean, I hate films that are like preachy.
Yeah.
I don't think a film should try to tell you how you should behave or how you should think,
Yeah.
whatever. But there is some kind of no. Maybe you're by just letting the film pass through the camera into you and then into the film. That's the end of your obligation.
Yes. Very
And,
good. Yeah.
and that you can expect. And I know that this is tragically true that your film will be seen by just the audience that you think will most understand it. They will see it completely differently than how you see it. And you're longing, like for me, I'm longing for that kind of bond with the audience where I have the illusion that we're seeing the same, we're feeling the same thing. And then you realize by something that they say, oh shit, they weren't really seeing what I was seeing. But that's all right, because that's the nature of making the film or making the artwork. Is that's an act that's different from not making it. I mean, once you make it, it's out there and people can make of it what they will.
Yeah. That's John Waters. He rooted for the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz. And I mean, he sort of became a normal filmmaker, if you want to call that normal. But are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Well, it's tricky because old ideas become new, have a way of becoming new. I mean, sometimes new ideas, I wonder why we are attracted by some new ideas or afraid of them. I mean, like, I'm a little bit attracted to some aspects of AI, but I'm sort of afraid of it because I don't understand it. So I would say that I'm more likely to be afraid of old ideas, of new ideas than of old ideas. But old ideas can creep up on you and turn into new ideas that you don't understand. I mean, things that you thought that you understood when you were 14 or 45, or whatever, is you don't think about it the way you did then.
Yeah. Yeah, we're all constantly changing, and it leads perfectly into how Dante influenced you, or you've mentioned Dante, and I wanted to put in this context. In studying James Joyce, he says, we may see and hear nothing. So he flipped the reading experience of the eye into the ear experience of hearing. So you have to read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people. So that's changing the privacy of reading a book by yourself inside your inner voice. And one of our, the people have studied it, says the eye is space and the ear is time. So my friend who studies Dante said Dante wanted to eliminate time and space and wanted to go to paradise. You got to go beyond time and space. So any thoughts on this breakdown of time being ear, space being eye, and Dante's sort of impact on you?
Wow, you are a pretty deep character yourself.
Sorry.
You know who was even more influenced by Dante than James Joyce was Samuel Beckett.
Oh yeah, Beckett's huge.
Figure that one out.
Oh yeah, Beckett's have you seen, I mean, really a quick aside, have you seen Ross Lippman's documentary on Beckett's film? It's called Not Film. So Beckett made a film with Buster Keaton. It's a short film.
Oh, I've seen that film.
That's called film. but you have to see Ross Lippman's doc called Not Film, and it's a whole documentary on that. And then there's a new Hollywood film on Beckett too that just came out. I haven't seen that. But I mean, what is it about Dante? Did he want to go to paradise and go beyond time and space? And what's your take?
Well, there's so many different aspects to Dante. I mean, so the whole liturgical aspect of it is not something that's not what I love about it. And I haven't thought about it so much actually in recent,
Yeah.
thinking more 11 years ago than I am now.
Yeah.
There's also he happens to always run into people that are people in his world of politics in Florence and all of that stuff, where there's all the footnotes and that gives me a headache. So it's something else about Dante that remains as some kind of influence.
Right. Well, it's interesting because this whole idea of how Harold Bloom says you absorb your influences, then you abandon them. And I like, good luck. Yeah. Because then, especially when you go to, the Ann Arbor Film Festival every year, like I have for 30 years, and most of the students are clones of their teachers, and their teachers are, from yours and my generation. So it's like, well, if an experimental film is supposed to be an experiment, why are you cloning the people you've already, have done this? Got to come up with new experiments. It's not easy,
And that's always art that you start out with the influences of the previous generation.
Yeah. But then how do you abandon them? That's like, what
happens is that at a certain point, the most influential thing is your own work.
Yeah.
And so the pressure of where the work is taking you or opening up an avenue to you becomes more essential than what the masters or mistresses.
Right. Like Maya Deren in your voodoo.
I just was saying Maya Deren in my head when you said Maya.
Dude, that's ESP to the max, but it's just the zeitgeist is in the room because, you will love this, Larry. I talk to these younger filmmakers and I says, so who made an impact on you growing up? Like, what was the first experimental film you saw? And they'll go, Bruce Conner, or, Maya Deren. And then I asked this one woman once, I says, who made an impact on you? And she turned to me and she goes, not Maya Deren. So it was so refreshing because it becomes a cliche. You are supposed to say Brakhage, Anger, Maya Deren, and that's fine. I'm not discounting what Maya did. I think it's amazing, and I hold her in high esteem. But it is almost like reactionary then when you're shoved. This is what what do they call it? The canon is. This is what you have to see. How do you escape that?
Yeah, it's changing a little bit. One of the things that I'm finding is that I'm finding my audience now that I didn't have before. And the whole idea of the canon by certain people whose names shall not be mentioned here, who decided what was the canon and had their own reasoning of why it was the canon, was a distortion a little bit. And young people are finding different influences so that they are kind of breaking away. I feel that's an exciting time now in experimental film. And what young people, not all young people, but I mean the young people that I deal with, it's very thrilling to experience what they're going through. And I
Very,
feel I'm with them. If they're
yeah,
25, I'm 25 too.
very refreshing, Larry, and I congratulate you. Now, this is Milan Kundera in the book, The Unbearable Likeness of Being. This is why I love writing, because the character I'm writing about can go further than I can. That sounds good, but really? I mean, if I write a character on a piece of paper, how can that character go further than I can?
Well, it's almost like saying that the camera there are more things in front of the camera, even in an abstract image where there's like a dot in a certain place on the screen. Anything that's in front, that's projected, that was passed through a camera, has more in it than you could possibly see in your lifetime. Um, so maybe when you write something, it's also like that. It's like what's in front of the camera, and it can change. Um, it's also things that are so influential. I have experience now. I have this vision problem, so I can't read the way I used to be able to read. So there's things that you can find on YouTube. So I happened to land on Catcher in the Rye, and I know that when I was that age and that came out, it was so important. Like, my God, what an important thing. It saw into my soul. I listen to it now and I think, what was that about? What did I find? Yeah.
But that guy hit a zeitgeist that will never give up, because kids, now do kids, it's same with Kerouac on the road. It's how these little things happen, And so that's really good what you said, but there's a couple follow-ups. The poet critic Helen Vendler died recently, and in her bit she said, "I write to explain things to myself."
I feel that that's true. I mean, in writing the book, it transformed me. And a lot of the stuff that I was thinking about it because I was writing in the book. But because that opened up my mind to a certain way, it freed me to look at my films as though they were made by somebody else. So that in the years since then, in the last 3 years, when I've been giving talks and um, questions after screenings, my thinking has gone beyond that. I now
Yeah.
have a deeper understanding than I did when I was writing the book.
It's beautiful, Larry, because Charles Lawton was asked by Breck, "Why do you do acting? Why do you do this?" He says, "Because people don't know what they are like, and I think I can show them." And I mean, then he made that film, that he directed, Night of the Hunter. But you're very. Does your consciousness or unconscious or subconscious change? Because David Mamet, Steve Martin loves to quote David Mamet. He says, "Art is a product of the unconscious mind." But I mean, again, it's like, well, you're still have some in even George Lakoff, the cognitive linguistic guy, says, "Oh, well, we're only operating on like 10%." It's like, are you kidding me? I feel that me and you are here 90%. So how can art be a product of the unconscious mind? Or is it?
Well, the unconscious mind, you can't turn off your conscious mind.
Oh,
I mean, people try to do that with like drugs or getting drunk. Or I mean, a lot of writing is done by people who have gone to extreme to turn off their conscious mind, but still the mind is still going on inside there. Um, but you can try to go beyond it.
it sounds like what is the difference between art and science?
Science is a branch of art.
Wow. That's amazing because Cocteau said, art is science made clear.
Uh-huh.
But in regards to history, and when you said paradox earlier, I thought I almost switched the word to paradigm. And I was going to tell you this great joke. George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, says, he goes, "Brother, can you paradigm?" So this is McLuhan. When we push our paradigms back, we get history. When we push them forward, we get science. Any thought on that history and science in the word paradigm?
Well, I was thinking of the word Clorox. It's a paradox. I mean, Clorox cleans
Yeah.
up.
Paradox is a type of Clorox. No, it's all word association because it's like, I think it's a push and pull, like judo or jujitsu. So that jujitsu etymologically breaks down to softness and gentleness. That's Jew, and then jutsu is art and science.
Really? Well,
that is amazing. Chomsky says we learn more about ourselves from literature than from science. What do you think?
Isn't there a term for boxing as the something science? The
Say it again.
Isn't there a word to describe prize fighting as the something science?
Oh, prize fighting something science. I got to look that up. That's really important. Prize fighting something science. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Because this is like you saying that science is a branch of art. That's because we want to think that science is accurate and true, and art is more frivolous.
I was just thinking that Muhammad Ali was an artist.
Yes. Indeed. It's one of my favorites. I've studied Ali forever, all his films. He's a poet, an artist. And even at the end of his life, Larry, I knew people who like kind of drove him around, and I think he literally or maybe consciously or unconsciously checked out early, said, "Dude, I gave you all so much entertainment. I'm just going to check out and act like I'm kind of a vegetable." And they would give him his medicines, his meds in an ice cream cone. And then he would sort of like drop the ice cream cone. He wouldn't eat it because he knew they were meds. So maybe he was still doing that sort of, the way he knew how to, the gap is where the action is. He knew how to step back and let the guy get so tired.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what a true artist. But I'm curious because you're a reader, you come out of literature, comparative science. When Chomsky says we learn more about ourselves from literature than from science, what's your reaction to that one?
It's too deep right now.
Okay, no problem. Now, here's one more about science and art. This is McLuhan in interior landscape, meaning, what's inside our head, our inner voice. James Joyce solved numerous problems which science has not yet formulated as problems. So it reminded me of Tony Conrad. Did you know Tony at all?
Yeah, of course.
He said, artists break rules that haven't been made yet.
That's very good, right.
And then you brought up Einstein. Go ahead, sorry.
I'm just saying that he's a perfect example on the cusp between art and science. I mean, well, just leave it there. But
Yeah, because you brought up Einstein. He said, "Religion without science is blind. Science without religion is lame."
yeah, I don't know if I would follow that.
Yeah,
I have a problem about religion. I don't want
yeah.
to get into that.
Well, I've been doing a research project on the word archive, Larry, and I'm curious your thoughts. The word came out in 1600s as being a record preserved as evidence. That's sort of what we think archives are. Charles Baudelaire said, if you try to make a statement long, deep, and rich, it will age very fast. If you try to own the day you're talking, it will last forever. So that's sort of like, isn't the point of life to be here now, live in the moment? Why do we have to save all this stuff if the point of life is to live in the moment? So, do you think archiving is more innate in humans or more invented? Like your thoughts on just archiving?
This is very deep. I mean, it's ringing some kind of bell in my head that has to do with Walter Benjamin.
Yeah.
I don't know what that exact connection is, but I think that the word archive, as you bring it up, is very important, and it's like a area that I don't know if I have the time or the be able to do it, but it opens up something I would like to go into. I feel it's a very important question that you're raising here.
Yeah, it is because the Egyptians kept stuff in their coffin. Why? And we all have boxes of stuff. Do you have plans for your own archive? Do you have them in a college vault, or are any thoughts on your own archive? What are you doing with all yours?
Well, here I have an actual archive at the University of Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research. However, it's such a paltry, thin amount of stuff in there that all of the major things about me, about my life, about my past, about my parents, about my history, about my children, it's not in there. So I do think about that, is that the only thing that I actually have to leave for the future is the films. I'm not sure that they will live forever either. They won't. But anyway, I have to accept that if you want to find out anything, it's in the films. So,
That's a beautiful thing. So your films are your legacy, but do you have your family knowing, okay, with all those boxes that aren't in Wisconsin, what are they supposed to do with it? Do you have instructions, or do you just leave it to their whatever they desire to do?
well, these are lively questions for me. I don't know what. I mean, what I'm thinking of, I mean, I don't know at what level. Sometimes, even early in my life, even as a child, you you want to feel that every little thing, even things that would be very embarrassing, let's say every letter that I ever wrote and every letter that I ever received, I know that in the 19th century, 18th century, earlier periods, people wrote voluminous, there's the volumes of 20 volumes of the correspondence of Horace Walpole. Not to get into that, but now that there's the email, there aren't even any physical written, so all of that stuff is not happening, and people don't even write. Uh, but that's very important. I do think about that a lot, and not just as a personal thing, but about everybody's. I mean, there's the common thing that there's a lot of films. I mean, many student films, and many films are. I even try to do it to ask your parents something, or to find home movies that your parents took. way back. But I never did it. I regret it now. Like when I tried to ask my father about something that's in this film, Mnemosyne, Mother of Muses, uh, about certain things, he couldn't. He didn't want to get into it. He said, that's a memory I don't want to deal with. So I don't know. The important questions that I wish that I asked my grandparents, I didn't. And so it's gone forever. So in some way, that's okay. There's also the pleasure of the ephemeral. I mean, some like art, there's the art of the ephemeral, which I find that very interesting, something that only exists in the present, and then when it's over, it's over.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that you got into the photography collection business, right? I mean, that was part. Are you still in that? And
No,
what is?
I had that's an important thing in my life because it was a big part of my life. It took tremendous amount of time and energy. I learned a lot. I had a whole uh, reputation in that field, and I started to feel a few years ago that I'm wasting my time. I'm not a business person. It wasn't making the kind of financial contribution to my life that I needed, and I just stopped it. And in the book, there isn't anything mentioned of it. This is a big part of my whole life. And so in my book isn't a biography. Nevertheless, I've blocked it out. It's not now. Everything is with my film life.
Well, that's amazing, Larry, and I'm glad to hear it because making changes in one's life is a difficult thing. Like you can be forced to do it or you can make that actual decision. So I respect you because it sounds like you made that decision. It wasn't forced upon you. And again, I would love to, we got about 15 more minutes. And I would love to go into being an educator because you did spend many years being an educator. And here's a McLuhan quote to just start us off. It's misleading to suppose there's any basic difference between education and entertainment. It's like setting up a distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other pleases. However, it's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So maybe you can talk about that as an educator. Does that resonate with you? Whatever pleases teaches more effectively? One guy told me, no, whatever displeases teaches more effectively. But I mean, your approach to being an educator, and what did you learn from that?
Another big issue for me nowadays, I find that I have this urge to do teaching now. I feel that I'm a better teacher now than I was when I was officially a teacher. I mean, I'm aware of all of the things I could have done, should have done, didn't do, did, regret that I did it. There's a lot of that. But I find that I've been doing these things when I recently was on a tour in the Midwest and previous tours. I I meet. It's called originally called master classes. If that's something that comes from music, I hate that term actually. But I've met individually with students, advanced graduate students, one-on-one, talking about their project that they're working on and trying to be helpful to them to realize more what they're trying to do in film, sometimes with a group of students. And I want to do, I have plans to do more of that. No, there's some kind of urge that I feel. Um, it's akin, it's not the same, and it's not at the same level as making films, but it is an inner impulse that I have to do that. And I also wonder, it's very tricky. I'm thinking about that now with certain people that I've established a kind of connection with them through screenings that I had. My new film, by the way, is called Q&A. I don't want to say anything more about it, but that's related to.
Beautiful.
But
Larry, but
yeah.
what was it that you learned that, yeah, I mean, did you learn that whatever pleases teaches more effectively? Like, what was that change you said, I wish I could have, or you've changed your sensibility on approaching how you educate. You're like, oh, I didn't have that so much back then and now I have it. Is there anything about pleasing teaches more effectively, or what did that change involve that you have stepped back and seen?
Well, there is, in terms of displeasing, I confront that a little bit. I mean, in general, when I meet with somebody, and also people send me their films, and it's an important part of my life. I take it very, very seriously. And then I don't know what to do. I mean, I feel most comfortable when there's enough in there of what they're sending me that I love, I understand, I appreciate, so I can work with that. Sometimes I have a thing where I see right away, this is wrong, or I don't think that this is serving what I feel the film is trying to be. And I wonder, I actually stop myself and think, I don't know whether it would be too hurtful. I don't want to be hurtful to somebody. I want to find what they have in there that they're trying to work with, try to express, and help that come into being. But sometimes it's glaring that you got to say something about it. I know that there were fellow teachers that I was aware of, and people, politicians, who were showmen. So sometimes in every university, in every department, there's somebody who is the showman, and they have packed audiences of crowded, filling the whole lecture hall with those people. That's an element, and sometimes maybe that's one way of being a good teacher. It's not my way.
Right. Yeah, I even heard this rumor that that theory that one of the teachers at Cal Arts didn't teach art as well as he could because the students would possibly get his potential gallery space in a gallery. So it's like, that sounds ridiculous, but people say, no, that's true. I says, well, that could be in every art form, film, literature, everything. But they said, no, it's especially in art, but who knows? I mean, we talked about that last time, how people say, well, my experimental film's a video installation. Well, I'll pay you to have in my art museum now. If you say I got an experimental film, they go, we're not going to pay you. So, I mean, it's beautiful that you've gotten to this point where people are showing you respect to. I hope they're paying you to go show your retrospectives and do these master classes that you can actually get paid for it too.
It's interesting because I'm going to have a retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art later in the spring. And when I met with the director and the assistant, just to start talking about planning it, immediately the director opened with, I know that you can't make any money making these kind of films. Hopefully this can be helpful to you. That was so encouraging, and right off that I could, because I got so used to,
Right.
Maybe one of the ways I was such a failure as a business person with this photography stuff is I got used to doing all this stuff without getting any kind of remote money out of it.
Yeah, the art gallery I used to show experimental films at in Venice was called Sponto Gallery. And our motto was, how much are we not paying you? Double that.
Right.
It's not funny, but
Yeah.
okay. You're touching on something that we touched on a little in part 1 and part 2 now, is truth, seeking some sort of truth. Or as Louis Buñuel says, I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it.
Mm-hmm.
Shelby Foote said, a fact is not a truth until you love it. Any reactions to either of those?
Yeah, the truth is now banging into my head. I'm not sure. Truth is a problematic idea. I'm thinking about something that I talked about in a book, about a film called Not Not, which is the first of these, since then, doing these digital films that are edited digitally. But the soundtrack is a musical work which has to do with the multiplication table. And the attitude of the film towards that is to question that. And then when I was writing about it in the book, I remembered this thing in Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground, where he talks about the fact that 2 times 2 is 5 is a much deeper truth than 2 times 2 is 4. And that registered with me. I feel in relation to science, because science has a lot to do with truth. So that brings that back to that. But that there's something, that's my critique about this educational film about the seasons. It's not that I don't believe that the seasons are caused by the earth going around the sun and all of that stuff, but yet there's something wrong with it. Underneath that, there's some kind of truth that could also be true, that that's not the cause of the seasons. And maybe that freedom, another term we could throw in here, freedom involves freeing off the yoke of truth. And of course, what science, think of the change of from Galileo, the challenging what seems to be the most true things you could imagine, namely that the earth is the center, the whole religious, theological idea of the universe that was then challenged as not being true. Or think about the way entanglement takes the notions of ordinary logic and Newtonian mechanics and says it's not true. So what is seen as true eventually becomes not true. Even
Larry,
though,
yeah,
no,
that's Niels Bohr said the opposite of a fact is a falsehood, but the opposite of a profound truth may be another truth. So it's really amazing what you touched on, especially because you integrated the word freedom in there. Because Utah Phillips said anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Well, guess what? Etymologically, the word freedom means making one's rules for oneself. What does freedom mean to you now?
really deep question. Something I want to bring back, touched on earlier, but maybe connects to this now, is that a kind of there was a song in my youth called "Don't Fence Me In." It was like a Western song, and that's been the motto of my life because I've made a number of big changes from music to literature to film, whatever, from being photography dealer to not being photography dealer to whatever. Whenever I felt that I was being pigeonholed in a certain, this is who I am. This has to do with the archive and all that. What are you? Whenever I felt this is how I am, my response is I'm not going to go there anymore. That's not who I am. So I'm going to jump into another thing until you think that you have me figured out, and then I'm going to jump to another thing. And so freedom for me in my life is to go as far as possible to jump out of this into that. And I think one of the bodies of work that I got into that changed my life in a very bad way, actually. But anyway, I became and Maya Deren had some role in this, is I found this desire to get involved with going to Haiti and getting involved in voodoo. And I did. And that, I what attracted me was that voodoo in the popular imagination is the embodiment of falsehood. Like something is ridiculous, you say it's voodoo economics, it's voodoo science, means it's wrong, it's completely dangerous, it's evil, it's bad. I wanted to go into that as far as I could go to help me come out of the other side. And so freedom to me has to do with this constant transforming. And in the way, I mean, the book tries to deal with that in the way that I could, but the way I'm talking about what my legacy is not in the archive, but it's in the films. The films are in part a record of jumping from one to another, and that's as far as I can get in freedom, so that I am free. It's kind of terrifying to be this free, like with this new film at my age, having just made some really films that I really feel are important ones, to go into the unknown is pretty terrifying in a way, but that's where I have my freedom. Even if I can't succeed, I don't know if I will be able to.
Yeah, that's called courage, dude. You really inspired me there, because Don't Fence Me In. I know that song from Sonny Rollins' version, and he does this.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
He's the only one living from that great Harlem photograph of all the jazz guys. And what really inspires me about Sonny is he would go backstage after the concert and keep playing. And the guys in his band would say, dude, we're done. And he says, I'm still trying to work things out. And I mean, that's what you're doing. I mean, you're an inspiration to me, Larry. You're still trying to work things out. You're not like, well, I'm set. I did my legacy and that's it. What you touched on there was interesting, because I study in a reading group, Carl Jung, and that's like being aware of your shadow self, in that, if voodoo embodies falsehood, then, how do you transform that and how do you integrate it? And what McLuhan learned from the Wake is, how do you flip a breakdown into a breakthrough? How do you flip a rejection into a redirection? It's sort of like integrating that. What's a question that remains unresolved for you, Larry?
First, I want to give myself a little time to process that question.
Please. Yeah, go ahead.
In that image that's on the cover of the book of the kid with the shovel, there's a shadow in there. And the previous film is called Four Shadows. Now, I was not thinking about Jung. I mean, I admire something about his work. He's not one of the figures that really has touched me. But shadow has been very important in all of its kind of thing. Now, ask me the question again. I'll see if I can.
Yeah. No, that's good. I love that. The cover of your book has that shadow. That is so good. What's a question that remains unresolved for you?
I mean, unbelievably, when I say that the film that I'm processing now is called Q&A, that question is the question.
Yeah.
In other words, I'm not just seeking for the answer. I'm thinking of the question for the question.
Yeah.
Which we talked about that way at the beginning of this whole discussion.
That's McLuhan said, everybody's running around with the answers, but what are the questions? And in his whole thing was, how do you invent a new metaphor or a new question? It's not like finding out a problem and having a solution. It's like, no, it's a continuous Mobius strip or a snake eating its tail. It's or it's like the cone. Is progress cyclical or cumulative? It's a
So,
cone. Yeah.
and circle. I think I've cured myself of it. One of the things that was said about me by my students and maybe by other people, and I had to admit it was true, is I would talk around in circles. I would come back to it. I mean, I think that I don't do that anymore, although anybody who's watching this thing, you'll have to judge for yourself. But
that's all I do is talk in circles.
right.
And I talk zigzag circles back and forth. So, Larry, how has making films shaped your behavior?
Well, that's very interesting because originally I was overwhelmed by certain figures that were larger than life figures, and like almost everybody else, Brackage was sort of the example of this larger than life figure. And my initial thing was to recoil away from that, so that making films like Fog, the films that I started with, in which there was no editing, it was just the camera continuously running. So I made a bunch of films like that, and then I jumped away from it. I never did that quite again, but I felt that that wasn't my way, and that made me embarrassed because a lot of the artists that I loved and admired were powerful figures in their life. And I felt I wasn't doing that. But now the idea of the red thread, one of the meanings is the thread that goes through all of my films. It is autobiographical. It is now finding in this life that it's as rich as anybody else's life. I don't have to be ashamed of my life. So that the origin of the films and the influences in my life, family things, women that I was in love with, whatever, those were really important parts of the films, so that the films made me free to live my life. And then the life came back to the films. So, for example, the Haiti thing was without being a filmmaker or the filmmaker that I am, I would never dream of doing that if I stayed as a photo dealer or stayed as an academic person or whatever. I never would have done that. The thing that freed me to do it was that I was a filmmaker, and then that's reflected in the film that I made and in the future films that I made.
Really strong, Larry. It evoked two things. Frank Zappa has a term for that. It's called conceptual continuity. It's that thread that runs through all, and it's never ending. And it's how you recognize those patterns and you get the big picture, which is called comprehensive awareness. And then it's like we've been exploring what is the function of music, and one David Moss said it's the sound of being alive. So that's that's what it is to be human, is what you just described, how it shaped your behavior, that freedom to live. So two more and we're out of here, Larry. It's really been a pleasure. This is Thornton Wilder. And in 1928, he said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for hours. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
It's interesting that 11 years ago, I remember this very clearly, that one of the questions that you asked was like this question.
It was the exact same question.
And what I said at that time, I said, I can't answer it because it's a secret.
Yeah, you
I
did.
remember that.
Good memory. I can't answer it. It's a secret 11 years ago.
However, now I am answering it. I'm not afraid. I mean, I haven't answered it in a literal autobiographical way of telling the things that I'm ashamed about or whatever. But in a way, I am out there. I'm opening myself up. I'm out there.
Yeah, I'm out there. That's your answer. What's it really all about? I'm out there. That's beautiful. Pretty simple. I'm out there. That's 3 words, dude. You're concise and articulate. Larry, what gives you the most optimism?
Well, I have a really strong feeling about babies and animals. And by the way, I want to say that I've been today, or even I'm still like looking at stuff about elephants communicating with each other and whales communicating with each other. And so that it's not just humans that communicate or try to communicate or whatever. Wait, say it again.
No, what gives you the most optimism? That's what you
Well,
said.
optimism. I find it's heartbreaking. Like when I go for a walk, I live near the Hudson River. I walk on the river. I see people walking their dogs or children doing that, and it breaks my heart. Sometimes they're so fragile. And in Haiti, that was certainly an experience of seeing the beauty of these little children who are so totally beautiful, and knowing what kind of life is before them. And look at in the world, I mean, how many millions of children, even as we're speaking, are not able to even become children. They die as babies. You know, so the very thing that gives me optimism is the feeling that we're not going to wipe out the earth. We're not going to wipe out the human race, even though millions of people are going to die along the way. I mean, I don't mean dying of old age, but being killed along the way. But that's what gives me optimism.
Yeah, beautiful, Larry. It reminds me of Louis Buñuel said, "Long live the living." You know, it is. We can persevere through all this, and there are things that are challenging and need to be corrected. Like my essay I wrote recently was, "Can art stop war?" It's like, you know, war's an old violence and war is old idea. We don't need it. We can process it, and we're more hardwired for cooperation than we are for war and violence. So we should nurture that cooperative commonality spirit. And you know, that's really beautiful, because what I asked the first question in part 1 11 years ago is, what's the best thing for a human being? And Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being. And the last question is what I got from, they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life, what gives you the most optimism? And he said, other people. So it's sure been fun spending this time with another person, especially because it was you. Larry, thank you so much for your time and energy. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate it.
Me too. We have a real bond. I mean, this is so, you were so into all the questions that are so important. I didn't expect it, and thank you a lot.
Yeah, Larry, I wanted to reach out and say, if you want to do this again anytime in the film you're making, send me 5 words that you want to explore. I can come up with questions because I have tons more. We could do a part 3 easily anytime.
Well,
But there's one thing I forgot to add about your optimism. You have strong feelings for babies and animals. I learned from Carolyn Casey, Coyote Network News, this word biomimicry. And it's like you knowing music. Messiaen, the great French composer, would listen to the birds.
right.
And then Eric Dolphy listened to the crickets. That's what Sun Ra said. I get inspired by the sounds of nature. So that's called biomimicry, that it's a reversal again, that we're looking to the animals and they're somehow coexisting with us. This guy, I get up early in the morning and I saw this guy the other day and he says, "Have you seen any coyotes?" And I'm like, "Yes, I saw one." And I mean, I'm in a city urban setting. And I looked at his dog and I says, "Well, are you afraid the coyotes will get your dog?" And he goes, "I think we can coexist." And for him to say that was so fun and great and loving. Like, no, we got to get rid of him. He was like, "No, we got to coexist."
Right.
Yeah. So Larry, stay in touch. I hope you come to LA and do a show here. And I'm going to hit the end broadcast button now, but I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I still speak to you when?
Oh yeah, I'll hit the end stream button here. Hold on.